Officially, welcome to Conversations in Science, hosted by the Buffalo Museum of Science. My name is Gabrielle, and I will be your moderator for this evening. Before we start, a few housekeeping items. This presentation is being recorded and will be uploaded to our YouTube channel, where you can watch all of the past Conversations in Science. Everyone is muted so that we can maintain sound quality. Please use your chat function to send questions to me, Gabrielle, and I will relay them to our speaker. And you're also able to use the raise hand function to ask a question. In order to raise your hand to speak, tap on the More button from the meeting controls at the very bottom. It looks like 3 dots next to each other. And on the More, there is a raise hand option on the pop-up menu. If you're on a mobile device, you'll have to touch your screen to bring that list up at the bottom. And when I recognize you, I can ask you to unmute. And feel free to ask questions throughout the program. I'll keep an eye on the chat to relay those to our speaker. Very good, okay. Originally, these programs were held at the museum with organic conversations kind of throughout and at the end, but we are pleased to bring the virtual version to you today. We thank RP Oak Hill Building Company for their continued support and presenting sponsorship of Conversations in Science. It's the support of our sponsors, donors, and members that enable us to continue our mission and serve our community. Now, I would like to introduce our speaker, Ileana Olmos. Ileana received a BA in Fine Arts from the University of North Florida in 2007 and an MA in Historic Preservation at the University of Florida in 2009. Shortly after, Ileana became involved in a number of hands-on courses, including architectural restoration of medieval structures in northern Italy in 2010. This was followed by a practical conservation course in archaeology in Israel under the sponsorship and training of the Israel Antiquities Authority in 2011. She's also completed a Master's of Science in Conservation Studies from the University College London in Doha, Qatar in 2014. While undergoing her Master's of Science, Ileana also served as an intern for the International Center for the Study of the Preservation and Restoration of Cultural Property. They're also known as ICROM, and that was in Rome, Italy, assisting in the preparation and organization of the 2013 Forum on Conservation Science and the 38th session of the World Heritage Committee in Doha, Qatar, where she served as an advisory body for the ICROM APAR Arab section in 2013. Ileana has participated in excavations in Qatar, Turkmenistan, and Israel, and has conducted archaeological conservation of pre-Columbian artifacts in Panama, Florida, and Arizona. Just for transparency, Ileana and I know each other from our time in Florida, so it is great to be connected with you again. It's nice to be able to continue our colleagueship across state borders. And I would, with that, like to turn it over to you, and I will spotlight your video.
Good evening, everyone. I am very happy to be here. I'm very excited. Like Gabrielle said already, we are former colleagues from Florida, and I couldn't wait to have this opportunity to have conversations in conservation tonight. A field that is normally misunderstood. So I thought this would be a great opportunity to just clear all those dark spots. So let's do that tonight. And I have to share my screen. Can you see my presentation now?
Yes, we are good to go.
Okay, why are we doing this talk, Gabrielle? We're doing this talk because we have numerous conversations about conservation and how people don't understand what we really do. When I normally tell people that I do conservation for archaeological objects, they first feel confused because they think conservation is probably environmental, but then I have to say, no, I do conservation for archaeological objects. And the next question is, do you work with dinosaurs?
Yes.
We do not work with dinosaurs. We work with either objects that are in public lands, underwater, and also in situ, which means on site. I don't know if you can see my screen from my office, but I have some of the tools that we normally use in the field. Just let me know if you can see the tools.
That looks like a makeup artist's kit to me.
Yes, but it's not. We have a lot of tools that are standards for conservation, and they normally come from other, fields. So we have scalpels, we have all kinds of hunts, and we have fiberglass, we have brushes, and all the things that you can think. But these are just like it's just like a small percentage of the things that we actually use in the lab. We also have, besides standard tools, we have diagnostic tools. And Carla, which is here right now with us, she should know that we use microscopes, x-rays, and other tools of that nature. So conservation is a field where sometimes people don't understand that, yes, we are uh, people of science, but we also involve, or we have to know art, understand objects, understand material science, so we can better diagnose our little patients, like I like to call them, all the objects. So let's
We
go
did.
to the,
We got a comment that somebody wasn't able to see the tools, so let's go back and we'll revisit that at the end of the presentation
okay,
as well, after you've gone through your slides, so we can get a good look.
okay. So because I wanted to have a more casual setting, so we all could understand what we do in conservation, and there's not only one thing. Many people think that conservators just put together ceramic pots and stuff like that, which is wonderful, but we do many things. In the first image to the right, let me get my pointer here to the left, I'm sorry, right here. Looks like I'm not holding anything. Actually, I was doing cleaning of a coin from the 10th century in Turkmenistan. This lab was set in the middle of the desert. Don't worry, I had AC, I had a good time. I was there for a month, and I was pretty much working with fresh findings. So, in other words, whatever the archaeologists found on that particular day, they will give it to me and to other people, and we will just work on these objects. So you see here that I have a visor, which I have one right here, so you could know that I still have all this with me. And the second picture, yeah, it looks like I'm not doing much, but I am actually evaluating a storage room because we needed to understand the capacity of the place, the condition of the place as far as climatic. Uh, in conservation, conservators, we always need to understand and manipulate the environment. We will explain more about that later, and how environment and pollutants and all that stuff affect the life of the objects that we so much love and we want to preserve. And the third one is conservation in situ that I was involved in Qatar, in the center of the city, where we had a developing company trying to build amazing tall buildings, but they needed for us to come and rescue some of the objects that they believe were archaeological. In fact, they were. There were three objects that used to be used as ovens, and they're called tandoors.
Let me just break in real quick. For those of you who are having trouble seeing Ileana as she's speaking, as well as the presentation, if you're using the Zoom client on the top left, no, sorry, left and right. On the top right side of your screen, there's a button that says View. If you click on that, it looks like kind of like a chalk slate for movies. Next to it, you've got a standard, a side-by-side speaker, or a side-by-side gallery. If you like, you can click on the side-by-side gallery, which will show you everyone along the side at the same time. And then you'll see the presentation on the other side. Very good. And then Ileana, I saw your red dot going around pointing at each
Yes.
image as you were telling us about it, and that is excellent as well.
Okay, let me go back to that one. So I had a lot of people asking me before the presentation, what are all these wonderful tubes connected to the wall? This was an interesting project that took place in the premises of the King David tomb in Jerusalem. And it happens that when you work in conservation for buildings, because let's understand that besides doing conservation for archaeological findings, objects, I also have, I've been trained to do conservation in buildings, which are related, they're family, there are many particular things that are similar. Uh, but yes, let's go back to this. So what is happening here is that sometimes in conservation we use materials that at the time um, are suitable for what we want to preserve, because the whole goal of conservation is to prolong the lives of buildings and objects that we have in different cultures, so we can in the future we can have them still around and understand where we came from. So when we had to do in this project was pretty much remove the mortar, which is like this wonderful glue, which is a formation of it's not a formation, is put together with sand and different aggregates and whatnot. And in modern times people love to use cement. Cement is a wonderful material for modern um, buildings, but not for antiquity. So we have to reproduce the recipe of the mortar, and we have to pretty much inject the mortar into these walls that went as far as 1 meter deep. So the last step was the last crevices that we have, that we can that we have difficulties to access. We have this kind of silos, and we pour the mortar through those, and I was sealing the last crevices in cracks or whatever that we had on that wall. So that was towards the end of that project. The next
Whoa,
picture.
whoa, whoa! Let me ask a question real quick. So
Okay,
this
okay.
this is fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you to install those look kind of like garden hoses. Are those like length of hose that are put in there, or is it a different material?
Actually, that exactly is what it is. But you know, we have to be creative in this field as well. So we use things that are normally for different purposes, but we repurpose them for the good of the object.
That's
So
a lot
yes,
of good engineering. And then, did you remove the cement, or was it simply piping in the original formula with the cement left in there as well?
oh yes. Sorry that I didn't explain that clearly. We have to physically remove the cement with like very archaic, yes, tools. So once all those crevices were voided, then we proceeded to inject the mortar into the wall,
Very good.
and that took around 30 days. We have 4 long walls, and it was a fun project, and we have at least 10 people in that project. I just happened to be on my on that picture.
Very cool.
Okay, the next picture, or this one right here, I don't know if I still have my pointer. I don't see it. Yes, we were reconstructing a drywall, and drywall means something in modern architecture, but drywall in this instance was just walls with no mortar. Mortar, no mortar. And they have the same type of stability, but we have a different technique. Here we just have to be magicians and just cut the stone precisely so they could feel like a puzzle. And this took a day. We were a group of like around 10 people as well. And of course, I don't have the before pictures when all of the stones were on the ground. And that's me right here. So
Wow.
one of the misconceptions about this profession of mine is that we are a new profession. Yes, we are new. The conservation profession, as we know it today, it involves science. It involves uh, chemistry, knowing about materials, artistry, technology, but it didn't start like that. But the concept started, I want to say, before, even before the 1500s, with people like Leon Battista Alberti were concerned about what's going to happen when this building decays. Because I know that the term decays is kind of, it sounds kind of like harsh and abrupt, but everything in life decays. Organic decays, non-organic decays. So even back here, we had people like Leon Battista Alberti, Pietro Edwards, Violet Leduc, Ruskin, Morris, and Cesare Brandi as the founding fathers of what we know as a conservation today. And I call them founding fathers because back then we don't have a lot of figures involved in conservation, and they were mostly technicians and I'm going to say helpers. And but yes, we evolved into something very scientific. And let me show you the next slide.
We have a great question about mortar here.
Yes,
Um, did you aim to recreate the original mortar that was with the original building of the tomb,
absolutely.
or did you try to develop something that was newer and would do the least amount of harm? So, like, how do you balance between the use of original materials or the use of, a lot of times people think, best materials for solving an issue? What's the goal in conservation?
In conservation of buildings, in conservation in general, is to keep integrity, the integrity of the objects. And when it comes to materials, just like mortars in a building, like the one that I showed, what they used, I want to say maybe 20, 30 years ago, was cement, Portland, which is a wonderful material, like I said before, for modern buildings, but it's not good for the kind of stone that we were treating. The stone that we were treating is the Malachite stone, and is natural, or it is a stone that you see in Jerusalem and in that region. What happens is that when you, instead of working with the as close as the old recipe that they use for mortars, if you use something like Portland cement, that material is stronger than the stone that is in the building, and there is a constant fight of the element that is older, the mortar that is new, and that it has different properties. So also bringing new materials into an old building could create friction, not only physically but chemically. And then you see when new materials cause for buildings to, I'm not going to say collapse, but start creating crevices, and because the material, in this case the stone, cannot breathe, and when it starts breathing, it bumps into the new material that is very, very strong, and then you have condensation, and then you have this, and this is why going back as close as the old recipe is important. That's why we have to do research of the and analyze the pathology of the building before we can do anything.
That's
I don't know if
excellent.
that
Yeah,
answered your
that
question.
reminds me of, so I sew at home, and if you are using two different types of material, if you're using a cotton and a synthetic material, if you wash everything, the cotton's going to shrink and the
Mhm.
synthetic's not. And it sounds like it's the same kind of thing when you have a material that's too strong. It's it's inflicting the properties of the new material on the softer old material. So as close as you can get to having the same expansion and contraction rate, so the whole thing moves together instead of getting larger in some parts and kind of shuffling a little bit.
Yes, it's interesting because imagine that a wall in a building is a map of little connectors. They go everywhere and they need to breathe. Even though we see stones as strong as like marble or whatnot, they all have to breathe in a way. And if you propose to have a material that is stronger than the very stone that you want to save, is it doesn't work. It's a clash of two titans, and we want to save the older one.
Yes, we need to be gentle with our old
You
materials and make sure that
absolutely,
we're treating them with kindness and not forcing them
absolutely,
to stand in one place. Yeah,
yes,
because buildings move. They're everything is made up of atoms, and atoms move and exchange and expand and contract in their proximity based on heat, and temperature and changes in humidity, and yeah, all of those things need to be aligned so that the building doesn't shake itself apart very slowly. And
absolutely.
yeah.
Yes, I used to have someone who trained us that said, buildings aren't they're alive, and we have to think of them in that way. So I have here two illustrations. The first one on the left is of the Alberti that I mentioned before, that he was preoccupied with what's going to happen when we start having decays and loss in different elements, architectural elements in buildings. And he was already in the 1400s, in the 1600s, proposing things to better treat objects. So um, out of all these ideas from the past, there were norms and regulations and ethical and protocols to treat objects and also buildings. And we conservators, as Carla knows, she's in the audience, we have to follow them very closely. Okay, what else do we have here? And then we need to talk about cultural heritage because this is a very misunderstood topic. Culture belongs to all of us. And in the way that we protect them and we prevent decay and deterioration, we are we will go to the future knowing where we came from. There are many places in the world that I've been before where I was amazed by the structures and the buildings that I had in front of me. Not my culture, but some of these places in the world are heritage for the world. So how do we do that? Do we need to understand that conservation as a field is calling us to take measures. For instance, when we go to sites, uh, we know the sites deteriorate for wear and tear. So, yes, that is a wonderful column. This is a wonderful statue that you see here. But do you want to put your hands on it? Sometimes it's very tempting. Um, so all those things, there are many sites in the world that now they have to partially close because of wear and tear, because of people sitting in the same steps, because of, so we as part of this planet and as part of the cultural heritage world, we could do a little part. But for us conservators, it's even more important to understand conservation in the terms of preventive conservation. What is preventive conservation? The word says prevent, but are we preventing to conserve? No. Preventive conservation is the first thing that we should do when we have findings or objects. And what does that mean? Everything will decay or deteriorate one way or the other. So preventing, we can use, let's say that we can use things like, okay, what is the climate of Buffalo right now? How is the, right, Arizona? When we as conservators work in institutions and organizations where we store goods, we need to understand that we have to manipulate and be very careful about the environment. We know that too much humidity will accelerate the deterioration of metals. What else? Do as conservators do we want to manipulate everything all the time? No, minimal manipulation is a thing in conservation. If something doesn't need to be treated, just leave it alone. Just cleaning and go to the next one. So what about remedial conservation? Remedial conservation is when we have to treat an object that has started to show signs of deterioration and decay. Then we have measures as like chemicals. We have treatments that we do that are physically, we're manipulating the object, but we still having, we understand that we have to have the respect for the history of that object as well. And then the last thing that we know as conservators that we do, but it depends, I guess, how you were trained. But in my training, we understand that restoration is the ultimate thing that you maybe should avoid unless there's no other way to protect that object. We have objects that are in such a state of deterioration that are they're almost like virtually not there. And what we how we do in that respect, well, restoration is a thing when the object is about to expire. When we don't have any other samples in the collection, that's the only one. With this object is precious. All objects are precious. By the way, in cultural heritage, we don't see value as the world. All objects are valuable. But if we only have one sample of a specific type in an entire collection, we're gonna treat that with the respect that it deserves.
Yeah, and I'm on this slide too. I'm thinking about parallels that we have in the collections of the Buffalo Museum of Science, not only in our anthropology collections, but a lot of preventative conservation is done in our, we have an herbarium, and so making sure that things are mounted on acid-free paper,
Mm-hmm.
that if they have any um, the things that are used to affix the plants to the sheets of paper are usually string
Mm-hmm.
or like cotton twine or a very diluted Elmer's glue, because that's something that's been shown to be reversible as an adhesive. Um, and then also thinking about climate control, and there are lots of different things that people need to do, and the settings for a climate controlled storage facility in Buffalo would be very different from the settings in a climate controlled facility in Arizona, because you've just got, I mean, one, well, both of them can be pretty dry sometimes, but
Yes.
always taking into account what the larger surrounding thing is. You know, I think of climate control as like a lunchbox. First of all, what do you have in your lunchbox? Do you want to keep it hot or
Yes.
cold? And then is the outside hot or cold? And how do you adjust between the two?
I think that's a wonderful analogy because when it comes to storage rooms for objects and whatnot, the first layer is the building. And further out of the building, we have to understand if we have a building that is close to a body of water, that body of water will affect that first layer, which is the building. And then we go all the way into the case where the object is in exhibition. All these things are very important when it comes to preserving the life of an object, and that's the first step, preventive conservation.
So when we have ropes and stanchions in the Science Museum, they're there to be preventative conservation for the objects that are on display behind.
And because I was talking about restoration, and I want to be a little candid with this. This is a very nice image that I found in a private practice that they do conservation. That's what they do. And I always explain to people that restoration, and I know that sometimes the term restoration is a term that is interchangeable, especially in different languages. In some languages, restoration means conservation. But when it comes to us speaking this beautiful language here, English, restoration, like I said, it is the ultimate thing that you want to do to an object. You want to preserve the integrity of the object as far as the materials, and you also want to preserve the history of that object. And if we see this illustration here, this object has changed a little bit on the one and the second, the two different options that we have. I'm losing my pointer. Here it is again. So this is the original object, and we want to. What is the goal? To conserve the object. But is is this what we want? Is this a representation of this object? Perhaps not. Um, and like I said, in some instances, restoration needs to it needs to be done. But here we have the wonderful hands of a conservator thinking about the integrity and ethical issues, and not to add anything that was not there before. The same things go for conservation of the built heritage, which is buildings. If you have a building that never had a column that was uh, Doric, why are you going to implement uh, an object was not there before? That is changing the whole history of the object, and that is not ethical. So, of course, I'm going to say this is the best option because we still have the same object. The integrity is there. Maybe we have a little bit of shine. Perhaps we have metal here and it was clean. And maybe this also was refurbished, but not changed as the first example. So we have to be very careful about restoring. Like I said, if it's the only way to preserve that particular object, by all means, but don't change the integrity and the history of the object.
I like what you said about goals too, because if your end goal is to preserve a tangible piece of history, um, then you want to keep, the original materials all together. But if your goal is to maybe create a penny farthing bicycle that people are able to ride,
Mm-hmm.
then restoration would be the path that you would want to take. But you really have to, I mean, the role of a conservator is never to be making restorations that people can get up and ride around, but like thinking about restoration in terms of classic cars. A lot of people keep up classic cars by introducing new materials or maybe re-outfitting the engines. And some of that is, it's really dependent on if you are interested in preserving the fidelity of the original object, or if you're interested in getting it to a functionality point where it can be used in a manner. Because if you have an object that you are conserving, generally the purpose is not to use it as the way
Absolutely.
it was created for use, but to use it as a reference piece for research.
It's a cultural reference, and just because you were able to conserve the teacup doesn't mean that you're going to now drink tea in it. So yes, it's a great analogy. So I know that I might come across comical when it comes to these things, but it's just a way of conveying how important for us is to keep the integrity of the object. We are very serious when it comes to our profession, and we respect ethical codes, and we have them in so many organizations. And towards the end of this presentation, I have a listing of all these places where you can go and find more information about it. Today is just an introduction of some of the things that I've been able to do and have the fortune to see in other parts of the world, and just to give you a broad and general idea of how conservation works. So conservation takes place normally in laboratory settings, but like we've seen before, we can do it in situ, and we can do it in different places. Uh, Not because we're not in a lab doesn't mean that we're not doing conservation. We still are still part of this wonderful field. So yes, I was talking about the goal, and the goal is to retard deterioration or decay. So I know that when we study conservation, when we train in conservation, and when we do conservation all the time, we do manage a lot of materials. Uh, and an object conservator needs to know different materials, how they interact, their properties. We have to be able to identify deterioration. Even in glass, we have a different hues where we know that something is at this or that level of deterioration. And unfortunately, we don't have the entire day and to bring all the materials and all the representations of how they could decay or not. But I wanted to show you how, in the instance of metals, they could decay. So we start with, where's my pointer? This is the metal. It's the entire metal, and I'm not assuming that it's gold because gold normally doesn't deteriorate. It's yes, we know that about gold. So what happens when materials, especially metals, deteriorate, is an exchange with atoms and oxygen. So you see that this object here uh, start to show signs of deterioration. Then we see it again, but the metal core is still there. Then we see it again, and we start to see other layers. Some of the layers that we see in metals that are decaying and actively decaying are layers that are actually protecting the object. Some of those, not so much. But we still have in this phase, we still have the metal. Observe how the metal is less than before. And so all of this is sometimes when you think about a ferrous material, we say, oh, a rust. That's how we call, oxidation. Is happening in this object, and now we have a tiny little bit of metal that is, you can still see the three uh, uh, stripes. And then what happens here, it has mineralized completely. So that means the metal is no longer metal. And maybe to the naked eye, the object is still whole and is still an object, but it's also, it is just whole by all the deterioration and all that Ross, how sometimes people call it. So what do we do in conservation when that happens? We don't want this to become this. And sometimes we get objects in the labs that are like here. So we have measurements that we can take. We can consolidate the object, which is a very um, normal word that you will hear in the settings of conservation setting. And consolidation is nothing else than protecting or like adding a chemical that would just put in place or stabilize the object for now. If this is my object and all of this is corrosion and this is the only object that I have in the collection, I will try to make a replica of that before this collapses altogether. But if I have 200 objects like this, I will have to talk to the curator and say, we might have to not have this in this collection anymore because we have to think about resources and all that stuff. If we have more materials and this is not the only sample from that culture, from that era, I mean, we could have a conversation, but there are ways of avoiding this as well. But yes, I thought it would be important to explain that the decay and deterioration happens in many different materials. And in this instance, we are talking about metals.
And I like what you said about the protective layers that can
Mhm.
be added with oxidation. I know a lot of us are familiar with the Statue of Liberty looking
Mhm.
green, and so that is a patina that has formed on the exterior of, I think it's a copper? Is it copper? I'm not sure. But I think it's a copper alloy, if nothing else.
The
Um,
copper alloy, it would be like the entire statue, and then you have different oxides that, and the different colors for different kind of metals tell you at the level of protection or not that the object is at. So yes, I would say that that smooth patina that the Statue of Liberty has is probably protected. But normally, when I see green in any copper alloys object, I just want to like get rid of all that stuff. I know it's a compulsion thing. Uh, yes, but in general, and we are trained to understand the different colors mean different uh, levels of protection or not. And for instance, cuprite is red, and when we clean copper alloy coins, when we see we are removing the green, and when we see the red, we stop because then you know that you are reaching stability. So no more scalpels, no more anything hard. We can bump into any kind of like information, historical information that we could be damaging. So we stop. We need to understand where to stop. And how, like we were talking the other day, Gabrielle, we were talking about the importance of documentation. And documentation is a word that you will hear in both the Build Heritage uh, and also conservation for object. Documentation is important for conservators because not only because it's part of the ethical code for conservators, but whatever we have in our hands, whatever is trusted to us in a lab setting, we need to know how to record what we see. So let's say that I am happy to work in an organization and then I move from an organization to an organization. The work that I did has to be recorded. That object maybe in 20, 30 years with, or maybe less, will show signs of deterioration. It's probably could be from many, uh, maybe hopefully not because of something that I did, but it could be that that material is not suitable for conservation anymore. So we have to record everything that we see. We have to describe the object. We have to know how much it weighs. We have to measure. All of these things are important. It's just imagine having a patient. You would never propose any kind of treatment unless you know exactly the history of that object. And when it comes to history, we need to understand the historical background for objects is maybe a little different from humans. When you need to know where they came from, where they're made with, the technical how they were put together. Um, so we can better assess the treatment. So that is a norm. It's a thing that we do all the time. I have two different examples. The one on the left is when I was studying with University College London. This is one of 17 pages, and the second one it was on site, so it was something like more more fast and less formal, but indeed documentation.
It does look like a field note page
It
from
kind of
like a
does, yes,
biological specimen,
yes.
but it's recording specimens. The specimen is the object, and you need to
Mm-hmm.
take all of the measurements that you can when you're in the presence of that object. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, and you know, sometimes you work in different settings where you have more resources than others. In this specific lab, that was a dream to many of us. We have microscopes of all types, and if you can see, this is a picture through my microscope. So this object that I show on the previous slide, this one here, is glass. So I am sure that it doesn't look like that, but it's glass. So I needed to understand what was happening to this object. So all of this here that you see is sand. So I needed to, yes, a closer look to an object will tell you how delicate or how forceful you can be. I would never say forceful, but yes, especially in conservation. Uh, but you know, you can like measure like the weight of your hand when you see things under the microscope. Here, I believe I work with bamboo skewers. uh, I have happy to have one here to remove all of the sand and the soils and whatnot. And I could have used needles and pointy and like more, you know, not aggressive because it's glass. I didn't want to scratch it. So all of these tools are here to us to understand the object better. Um, so yes, I said that we have to take before treatments, during treatment. We have to write a treatment proposal. They has to be approved. When we write a treatment proposal, like you know, like any doctor to a patient, the patient has to be agree if they want to be, you know, in the ER or not, in the OR or not. So the same thing, we have to. I'm sure that curators are very familiar with this. Sometimes curators and conservators don't see eye to eye, but when we, you know, convey the thoughts clearly and efficiently about our patients, then approval comes, and then the final treatment comes. And sometimes when you are treating an object, you realize there's certain things that are not going to work out as you thought. So you have to change the proposal to talk to the curator again. But it's always a happy relationship at the end. It's for the good of the object. And we also make take pictures at the end. So we are, this is not the greatest picture. I don't know why it looks like that, but this is before treatment. And we always have to have a scale. We have to understand what it is. And most of the time, in some institutions, we also have the name of the object and more description on the photograph. So I wanted to show this picture because when I had this object in front of me for the first time, we didn't understand how all these uh, laces were connected, and I had to find an object that was maybe created in the same time, and it took a little bit, and I was able to find this. So I was able to also do different kind of we do can we have to do different testing when it comes to conservation. Sometimes something as simple as an UV test uh, could tell us more about the object. And this was the case. I didn't find anything organic or any cracks or anything that were there before. And if I wanted to go even further up, we do X-rays. And X-rays are not needed always, but are so helpful to understand the integrity of an object. This object it was perfect, was in good condition. It just needed to be cleaned pretty much, and it had some scratches that needed to be consolidated. For the most part, that was the treatment. I was just concerned about some different colorations that I saw. They were inconsistent with the makeup of glass. So I sent those pictures to the conservation science, like the science material lab, and we use XRF. And I know that you're familiar with XRF, Gabriel, right? And I don't know
I'm
if,
familiar with the scanning electron microscope, but not the XRF.
well, the XRF is an amazing tool that, like I said, depending on the resources of the institution, sometimes we do have them or not. But if we want to do like, uh, if we want to go deeper into the research, we can use this kind of tools. And this tool, what it does is basically it registers what is on the surface, not through the object, on the surface of the object. And I was very concerned about certain things that I saw in the object, but it was just exactly what I was expecting to have. These are the pictures that the XRF took. It was a benchtop XRF because sometimes you have the handhelds, the one that you can actually, it looks, I will show you in the slides to come. It looks like a weapon, but it's not a weapon. It actually, you have to, for people that have used an XRF, you have to slightly place it on top of the surface for one couple of seconds, and it has a software that where it can tell you the elements that the object has on the surface. So here I was very concerned about the blue spot, and these are the components that the XRF was able to detect. And so nothing to worry about, but it was better to be safe than sorry.
And it's important to know, yeah, what the chemical, or not the chemicals, but which atomic elements are in the material, because that gives you a better sense of the properties of the material, because properties arise from composition. And when you know the chemical composition, you can adequately and expertly address what needs to happen.
Yes, and also if you are doing a more deep, let's say I'm writing a paper about that object and I want to investigate where that object came from, and I don't have any documentation, because that happens sometimes. We have objects that they don't really have a lot of information about them. So with a with an XRF and extracting all of the elements that we see on the surface, we can put together and say, hey, this recipe sounds exactly the recipe that I saw from this ceramic and antique ceramic workshop in Egypt in this particular town, and I can go from there. So
Yeah,
it gives you clues so you can further your knowledge about that particular object.
it seems like a forensic analysis of the object and then tracing that back to other areas that
Mhm.
have the same composition. Yeah, cool.
Absolutely. So this is a small review in some of the things that we have discussed so far. So these are the most significant environmental factors which contribute to the degradation of objects. And we already talked about light. Light, a source of light that is not maybe um, control could damage textiles and many other organics. Temperature, the most important thing is that when we deal with temperature in a storage room or in a lab, is fluctuation. When temperature starts to fluctuate, that's when things start. It fluctuates on the graphic. It fluctuates in the life of that poor object. So maybe not in a short term, but it will always be something that long term could, uh, it's not good, but it promotes deterioration in some instances. So relative humidity is yes
Lacking in Buffalo. There's no
is
humidity in
it
Buffalo.
is it is very crucial to control levels of humidity. For different type of objects, we have different type of parameters for all of this that I'm mentioning here. Pollutants, sometimes pollutants you cannot avoid to have pollutants, even in a very controlled environmental, like in a climate control place. And there are pollutants that we don't even know are pollutants. So biological deterioration in the form of mold and whatnot, and many others, and pests. And I cannot stress this more, but we are going to have pests in places that we don't even think that they could be part of the environment. So monitoring pests and hopefully not monitoring, but taking the measures to avoid that, because pests eat organics, right?
Yes.
And dust.
Yes.
Dust is something that, okay, I always joke about dust a lot with my friends and colleagues, because I always said dust is the worst thing that you can have in a collection, because it's a really easy thing to do as far as housekeeping, but people don't know that dust could be acidic. Dust also attracts smaller creatures. Smaller creatures attract bigger ones. And then if we have organics, forget it. So yes, housekeeping is very important.
We have just
So
about 8, 7 more minutes in the present in our allotted time window. We're welcome to stay after for additional Q&A, but I just want to be mindful of the time as we go forward.
okay. And knowing that, and like this is just a table so we know more or less what we're dealing with when it comes to these numbers might not mean a lot to the general public, but like I said, I have other sources so we can go back and look into what this really means. But these are the parameters for all these type of objects. So let's see, this is an XRF. We were talking about the XRF. This is the handheld. Um, this is like we were talking about having X-ray. So what I'm trying to convey here is we do use standard tools. In the If we don't have diagnostic tools, we can always rely on like more standard tools, and we still can do the job. So, and I have an example here of photogrammetry. That is another tool that is used in conservation that I was exposed to. I don't have a lot of experience with that, but it's a wonderful tool when you want to recreate objects. I have here an example of the only photogrammetry that I think was successful with only 60 pictures. So let's see. I do not know if we can participate. Raise your hands, but I wanted to. This was my trivia question of the night. Uh, because the field of conservation, especially built heritage, became what it is now uh, because of the discovery of what archaeological site in the world. If we don't have any hands being raised right now, is Pompeii. So that was something that marked uh, that we will become more not serious about it, but that it formalized the what we do.
The strategy. Yeah, I mean, a
Yes,
lot of times the discovery of catastrophic incidents really does a lot to pull some policy together, as we are figuring out right now.
absolutely. Well, this is a review of everything that we have mentioned before. You could have this presentation through the Buffalo Science Museum and through um, Gabriel, but I wanted to show you this is the
Ooh,
same. This is the same object, and this is when I'm working in the object. It was a copper alloy, and it needed chemical treatment, and it was done in a couple days. Some objects take more times than others. Okay, we have less time, but I'm gonna still try to show you as much as I can of all the things that I've been able to do, not only in the lab but outside the lab. Everyone is always curious about this image. We had the privilege to work in Turkmenistan in Central Asia, in Merv, with the Institute of Archaeology of University College London. And what we had to do here, a colleague and myself, we were able to document 6 ice houses. They are mud brick, and we needed to map all of the decay. And this is exactly what we already explained about the King David's tomb. And here I am building. This was a reconstruction, but that was a workshop, so I was allowed to do that
nice.
in North Italy. In North Italy. So remember how I said that we needed to document this and map the deterioration? Here is how these kind of reports look like. So we have to create a system that we can convey what's happening in each layer. so we can recommend or propose things for the future. Um, and and like I said, just to show you the land amount of yes that we have to write in this kind of reports. But like I said, documentation is important. That was the first step, and we were able to map these 6 buildings. And I only have 2 here in a course of 20 days, going there every day and notating stuff. And you can see 2001, 2013, the difference, this collapse.
Wow.
2001 to 2013. So all of these things are important to see how we can find a remedy and save that building. We already talked about this, so I can go ahead and go to the next one. This is the final results of that rebuilding of that wall. And like I was conversing with you, that sometimes different settings call for different things. Here we were cataloging 1,231 chairs from a Byzantine site in Israel. And this is another example of another building that was actually in the center of Qatar, was the oldest place in Qatar, 50 years old. Uh, yes. So this is what we created as a group to understand deterioration so we could recommend. So all these things could be done through different kind of softwares, and we just needed to map the building as we went. And these are the results and the recommendations and all the cracks and different parts of the building. Um, this is, we already discussed this before. And again, another example of how conservation could happen in the lab and outside the lab. So this, we call this kind of intervention first aid, because we're salvaging the object from a place that is going to have now a tall building. Um, so these are all the steps, and then we were able to mobilize it back to the lab. So I don't know how we're doing in time.
We are officially at 7 o'clock. So um, if I can just get a check from everyone, is everyone okay to hang out for a little bit longer? Probably another 5 minutes or so.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, thank you so much. So here, because we talk about conservation, and we talk about conservation in mainly um, public land and in situ and in the lab, we also have, and I have the fortune to experience doing conservation for underwater archaeology. So as we see here, I don't know if you can tell, this object in the first slide is a hook, but it's covered with concretion from maritime concretion. And what we do is we use different kind of tools to remove it. And we use air scribers to remove concretion. Air scriber is like, it's actually like a mini jackhammer, and that with the help of air pressure can remove all these things from an object, and this is the result of that.
Wow.
Yes. And yes, I get this question a lot. It's not a paint, it's a consolidant, so it looks more even darker in this picture, but that is for the protection of the object, that actually went through electrolysis also to remove corrosion.
Is,
And we do
is that
that.
the consolidant is a clear layer that's put over everything?
Um, yes,
Okay.
but it was also a mixture of something that is like a paint, but it's not a paint, because paint will not be suitable for something like this. So here, from the when I was part of the Florida Division of Historical Resources, we had a lot of cannons. So these cannons have to be stored in like huge pools of water just to be stored. And then when they were ready to be conserved, we proceeded to remove corrosion with, again, with the same kind of tool. And then they need to go back to electrolysis, so the process could be done. So this is after electrolysis, and this is what the consolidant and protector. And I wanted to be able to show as much as I could today. So we know that conservation is not only done for ceramics or this or that. Also, we can do conservation of mosaics. And this took place in the Rockefeller Museum in Israel. And we were cleaning mosaics, Roman mosaics with dental tools.
That's tedious.
It is tedious, but it's what you have to do to be
Meditative,
able.
yeah.
Yes, yeah, you just have to have good music and you can do it. So I just wanted to establish, what is the difference in like the similarities when we talk about archaeological science and conservation science. The main thing that we care is artifact characterization, but many things we also have in common. So you can see this whenever you have the time after the talk. And I have some of few of my favorite objects. This was dear to me because it was such a small object. It was like the size of a button, normal button for clothes, and it was a brush, and it had inlays of semi-precious stones, and I have to remove one by one with the use of microscope and very tiny tools, clean all that stuff, and these are the final results. And I have talking about restoration, how sometimes that's the last thing that we want to do. But this was the only object that we had in the collections, and it was precious objects, and it needed to be mended, and that's exactly what we did. So this is the result. And yes,
A stick?
weaponry.
Wow.
Yes. So
A
as you
rifle.
see, X-rays allow us to understand objects and to plan ahead when it comes to treatment. So, and now I just wanted to present you with all these wonderful sources that you can go back and investigate more about the ethical codes of conservators, the different charters and conventions around the world, and the ones that are still in effect. And yes, I was very happy to be here tonight, sharing a little bit of what I do.
Thank you so much. And we will have those resources. If anyone wants them, just email me, ggraham@sciencebuff.org, and I'll be happy to share that with you, or you can look directly at the YouTube video if you want to freeze frame on that. This brings us to the end of our program. I do want to give a moment, I know we're a little bit over time, but does anyone have any questions that they would like to ask? You're welcome to come off mute or to use the chat function. We had a couple of questions along the way.
Great.
Got one, thank you so much. It was so interesting, and Gabrielle made it more interesting by being a fantastic moderator. It's just, thank you so much for that, Cora. It's having good friends that are doing interesting things. I feel very fortunate to be connected to such cool people in the world.
Likewise.
Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
So we're going to have a short hiatus of Conversations in Science, but you can stay up to date by going to our webpage, which is sciencebuff.org/programs/conversations in science. We'll be sending out an email with a survey to get your impressions of this event. So please look for that in your email. And if you'd like to visit us in person, if you are in the Buffalo area, we are open on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. And our special exhibit, Golden Mummies of Egypt, has been extended once again. So we're very excited to be able to continue to offer that. And mummies are also objects of conservation, which is
absolutely
kind of a separate story. Very good.
Indeed. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.